Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining our School on Wheels workshop today, Changing Attitudes and Behavior in Your Tutoring Sessions. My name is Amanda Carr and I'm the Engagement Specialist at School on Wheels. And I have with me one of our School on Wheels super tutors, Natalie Platon, who will be hosting the workshop today. Natalie has been volunteering at School on Wheels for several years and she was actually one of our AmeriCorps Vista members. She is currently a second grade teacher at KIPP Iluminar. Just a few notes before we get started. For purposes of sound quality, all participants are currently muted. You have the ability to ask a question at any time using the question pane, so simply type in the question and press send. We'll choose the order of the questions and read them out loud. You may also wish to use headphones for better sound. Thanks so much for coming by, Natalie. I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Amanda. Just like what Amanda was saying, I currently work as a second grade teacher at KIPP Iluminar, but I also sub for kindergarten to fourth grade. And I've also taught in several school districts throughout Southern California, like Los Angeles, Irvine, Temple City, Santa Ana, and Orange County. And I've also tutored at School on Wheels since 2014, so I'm pretty familiar with some scenarios that some of you might be seeing. And I also have after-school program experience and other experience with high school students as well. And for our workshop today, our goal will be that we're going to learn how to address and manage different behavior scenarios that occur when tutoring and our criteria for success. So how do we know we're successful? It'll be three things. So first, tutors learn at least 2 behavior management strategies. 2, tutors can respond to at least 2 different behavior scenarios. 3, tutors feel confident when implementing different behavior strategies. And the reason why I have this learning goal and why I have such a clear criteria for success is because you want to do the same thing with your students as well. For example, when you start their session, do they know what their goal are? Do they know what their goal is? And do they know how they could achieve that and be successful? So that's already something you could start doing with them straight away so that it could help with behavior management. And our first scenario
is... you know what? We'll do the polls first. So we do have a couple polls for you guys, for our attendant audience. So we will run them right now. The first question should be coming out in just a minute. So have you experienced a behavior or motivation problem with your student? So just simple yes or no. Go ahead and click 1. Okay, great. So about 86% is saying yes. So we've come to the right place. And now we have a second poll question. You can click all that apply for this question. So we want to know what sorts of behavior or motivational issues you might have been having. Great. All right, so we'll check those results out. All right, so it looks like inability to focus, not able to sit still is probably the #1 thing that tutors attending are seeing in their sessions. Easily frustrated, that's another really common one, and being uninterested in tutoring. So, but all 5 of these scenarios are relevant. So Natalie's going to touch on all of these. So great, thank you very much. We'll return to the presentation.
Right, so for today's workshop, we'll be discussing several common behavior scenarios that you may see in your tutoring session. So starting off with our first one, not interested in working with the tutor. So when I think of a kid and I think of a kid that's ignoring me, this meme comes to my mind. So I'm going to ignore you so hard you'll doubt your own existence. And really, a lot of the kids you work with in School on Wheels, they've had adults leave them. They've had people that they trusted, but then they ended up just not being reliable. So then I feel like a lot of the kids, they just start creating this wall around them, and they feel that they create this wall and they just ignore you and they don't interact with you, then eventually you'll just give up on them, just like how other adults gave up on them as well. So it's so important that when you see your kid doing this to you, you're still making that effort to reach out to them, and that you show to them that you really care about them and that you won't leave them or ignore them as well. And then we have a quick activity. So if you can name some or even all of your students' favorite interests, this is already the first step to just building that bridge and having them become more interested in you. Because if you know their interest, then you could combine that in your tutoring session, and then that can make the session more interesting for you. For example, just a quick story. I actually had a twin day at my second grade classroom at my school. And I decided to dress up as a twin, not with another teacher, but with my students, because I knew a lot of them love Minecraft, which is this popular game. And when I dressed up in that Minecraft shirt, all my kids were so engaged, and they were like literally into every single lesson I was teaching just because I was wearing a Minecraft shirt. And sometimes, like, if you know the interests of your students, whether it's like a video game, like Pokemon, or a book, that could already help start building our relationship, and that could help make the session more interesting for your kids. And then we'll go to the second scenario. So lack of focus on homework or other assignments. I know this was a really big issue for many of the people as stated in the poll. So sometimes your kid may just look like this, like, oh, I just can't focus, and they'll come up with any excuse to show why they can't concentrate or why they can't do their homework. And it's just all excuses. They could do it. You just have to really set that expectation. Just say, you know what, this session is time for doing our work, and I believe in you, and I know we can work together. And then one thing that really works well for my kids who are really distracted is to give strategic breaks. And what I mean by that is to use a timer so that you could calculate work time and calculate break time as well. For example, I say, okay, you know what? We're going to read this book straight for 10 minutes. I'm going to start this timer for 10 minutes. I know you could do it. And if you get these 10 minutes of work done in a row without interruption, then you're going to get a 2-minute reward of break time. And during this break time, you could like read a book, you could listen to music, you could watch a video on YouTube. But then once that 2-minute break is over, you're going back to another 10 minutes of work, then 2 minutes of break again. And eventually, when kids know that, oh, this time is work time, even though the time is short, they actually get a lot of work done as long as they know a reward is coming. And if you continue that cycle, then you'll realize like, oh, you know what? It only took us like 3 cycles to get all our work done. Or maybe even took 2. So that way they know what they need to do during those times. And another great value about break time is that you could actually build relationships as well. So when you see the videos they're watching or the games they're playing, you could ask them about it, and that helps build the relationships between you two. And then the other thing too about breaks is that you have to remember that all students are different. So maybe 10 minutes of work might be too much for your kid, so you might have to lower it to 5. But if you're doing like 5-minute breaks, and 5 minutes of work time and a 1-minute break, then you could just add or remove time as you feel is necessary for your student. And that's another theme that's important about these strategies, is that you can't use the same strategy for all kids. You have to be able to adjust the strategy so that it reflects the needs of your student.
What about for older students? Would that same, like the timer work for, say, like a high school student as well as like an elementary school student?
Oh yeah, definitely. It's just with the high school students, I have an expectation that they can work for a longer period of time. So I probably do like 15 minutes of work and maybe a longer break, like a 3-minute break instead, or maybe even 20 minutes of work and a 5-minute break. So it just depends on your students' capabilities. Because I have some mature second graders that can work really hard without stopping. At the same time, I have some high schoolers who literally can only do 10 minutes of work and that's it. Then they just need a break. And then scenario 3, difficulty sitting still. Oh, so this is what I think of when I have my 27 kids in my classroom and I'm trying to get them to all work, but someone wants to stand up, they just go. Or even at the carpet, someone just starts stretching and they're like hitting kids. I'm like, oh my goodness, we gotta get everyone sitting still. So I just read this funny comic. It says, I've tried regular desk and standing desk, but I found just plain old laying on the floor works best for me. So when your kid is saying that, they may sound persuasive, but don't fall for it. Like sitting in the chair is probably the optimum position for them to get all their work done. And yeah, if the student told you this, what would you say back? So just think about that for a moment. If a kid's telling you this, like, oh, I can't sit in my chair, I just can't do it, it's too hard. Do you actually have a good response for that? What would you tell them to convince them that really sitting in their chair is important? So these are actually 7 reasons why sitting in their chair will actually help them succeed. So 1, it builds confidence. 2, breathing actually becomes easier. 3, improves their circulation and digestion. That reason may not work for younger kids, but for your older kids. And then number 4, you can look taller and more fit. 5, it helps your muscles and joints because if you're sitting in the proper position, it just helps your body. And then 6, it changes your mindset. So just sitting in a stronger posture could actually help you have a more positive mindset as well. And then 7, just that healthy spine, because you really want to make sure that your back is straight, or else you could tell your kid your back could start bending and it could even cause you to look hunched. And the reason why I listed these 7 reasons is because when your kid is complaining about why they don't want to sit in their chair, you just tell them all the reasons why. And most kids are pretty rational. They'll think like, oh, you know what? That does make sense. I do want to build confidence. I do want to look taller, especially for kids that are short. Or I do want to help my muscles grow or become better at breathing. And that's what I realized with my kids too. Like I would tell them to do all these things like, oh, you need to sit down in your chair right now. But I never told them why. And once I started telling them that why, I realized that giving directions to them became a lot easier. And then the other thing too about behavior management is that, yeah, you could tell your student to sit down in a chair, and yes, you could tell them why, but some kids don't know what you want them to do when you're telling them to sit. For example, like if I told my kid to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and that's all I tell them, I'm not going to get the sandwich I want. You have to set really clear expectations about what sitting down at your desk looks like. So that's why we have this 90-90-90 rule. So with your feet are flat on the floor, 90 degrees at your ankles, and then your knees are bent at 90 degrees, and your hips are at 90 degrees as well. And then there's even a photo if that language is too hard for your student to understand. And the reason why we're really breaking it down is because especially for those younger kids, if you're just telling them to sit, they like sitting in your mind is different from sitting in their mind. So you want to make sure you have the same image of good sitting in your heads.
Just a question about the sitting
Yeah.
and standing. If you have a student that, might just be like a really active kind of kinesthetic learner.
Right.
Sometimes, we have students that really just kind of have to be like standing or, would you say that it's always necessary for them to be sitting? Are there some exceptions to that?
Right. As I said before, the strategies really depend on your students, which is why I recommended just having the work time and then break time as well. Because if you have a student that's really energetic, then those breaks are so important. They could still sit for maybe 5 minutes because, well, at least for my personal experience, just having a kid standing and working is just too hard because the moment they're on their feet, they just want to run. Or they just want to move around. Really sitting is probably the most optimum position for them to get any work done. But if you have to do 5 minutes of sitting and 2 minutes of break, just so they can release the energy, then that's probably the best way.
Got it. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And then scenario number 4, so disruptive behavior in group setting. So this one always makes me laugh. Like, why would you do the thing that I just told your classmate not to do? And the same thing happens in group settings as well. Like, you're working with one kid and you're trying to correct behavior, then all of a sudden another kid starts acting up. And I know that could be extremely challenging. So we're going to review some strategies to help you with that. So when a disruption occurs, you could try these 6 strategies. First, narrating only positive behavior. So what I realized is that when I'm telling my student to change something negative that I see, one thing I do, especially in group settings, is that I really praise heavily the one student that is sitting in their chair. So I'll be like, wow, Miguel is sitting in their chair so nicely, like completely ignoring all the kids that are misbehaving. Like, oh, you know what? You're going to get a sticker because I love the way you're sitting down. And that goes with the second strategy, like purposefully ignoring all negative behavior. So, like, for example, whenever I would ask my group a question, someone always yells out the answer. And then I would tell them, oh, I wish I could answer your question, but I need to see that your hand is up. And then I let another student talk who's raising their hands. And I think that combination of only focusing on positive behavior and ignoring all negative behavior really motivates your students to be positive. Because really a lot of students just want attention. And if you're giving them attention for something negative they do, they'll only do the negative things. But if you only give them attention for the positive actions they do, then they're more likely to do positive things. And then strategy 3, having private side conversations with students. So if you always have like one student who's really difficult in a group setting, and then you're trying to talk to them and all the other kids could watch both of you talk, it can be pretty embarrassing for that student. And if they want that negative attention, they'll think, oh, the tutor is talking to me and now everyone is watching us talk, so that's what I really want. But if you have a private conversation with them on the side where no one could watch you, no one could listen to you, then that student will realize like, oh, you know what? She doesn't talk to me in front of the whole group. She's only talking to me one-on-one. So if I want to act up and I want everyone's attention, then this won't be the way because she'll only talk to me by myself. Plus, it's just that respect factor because sometimes a conversation with a student can be pretty intense. And if you have to like raise your voice at them, then that could be embarrassing for a student as well. And that might make them have less respect for you too. And then strategy 4, letting students know when a consequence is coming. So let's say you have a student that's, like you told them, sit in your chair, these are the expectations, and they're still not doing it. Then you repeat again. Okay, the expectation is that your feet are doing this, your knees are doing this, your hips are doing this. I need to see you do this. And then if they're not doing it again, then that's when you let them know like, okay, like Martine, I've already talked to you. I've already told you twice what the expectations are. And if you keep not listening to it, then this is the consequence. I just want you to know that next time if you do this again, this is the consequence. Because when students get in trouble and they didn't realize that the consequence was coming, then they feel like, oh, my tutor is just unfair. Like, she's just giving me these consequences. She didn't even warn me. Like, if she had just told me, I would have fixed it. So it's really important to let the student know when the consequence is coming. And then to tie into that, just explaining positive and negative consequences of their choice. So let's go back to like Martine, who's refusing to sit in his chair. I tell them, like, Martine, if you sit in your chair and you get this work done, it's only like 5 minutes until your break. You're so close to getting that break. But if you continue to stand up, walk around, not do your work, I'm going to have to talk with your guardian and let them know. Because if you don't get your homework done, you're not learning. And if you're not learning, that's not okay. So just always tying that consequences back to how it really affects them. Because sometimes they don't realize that oh, if I'm not sitting down, then really all these negative things can happen to me and I didn't know. So you're just helping kids learn how to think. And then the last one is tracking student behavior. So for my students who really get distracted easily, sometimes I have like a sticker tracker where if they do one good thing really well, it's like, oh, you got a sticker. And then if they have maybe 5 stickers, then they could get a break, or they have like 10 stickers, then they could get a reward. So that way, the student who's really having difficulty concentrating could see, oh, you know what? I have so many stickers. I'm really making a lot of good choices right now. So maybe if I just work a little bit harder, then I could get my work done. And for high school students, you could just track it in a different way. Just use like a tally mark or something that's not as kiddie.
Yeah, I think, and especially, it's good that you mentioned that, because with our students, we really want to refrain from kind of giving them negative consequences as much as possible. We really want to focus on, keeping positive, and, you really do, ignoring the negative behavior, really reinforcing the positive things that they're doing is, so important to our students, because they get in such trouble all the time, from different adults in their lives, and in their lives, and we want our tutoring relationship with them to be a really positive experience. They can feel like, this tutor really understands the good things that I do. And, one thing I wanted to, we're talking about group settings, but do you have any thoughts about, when it's probably more common for a disruption to occur in a group setting, but what about with a student who's kind of acting out in a one-on-one session just with the tutor, where it's less about, in acting out in front of other classmates and more about that one-on-one? What would you say for that tutor?
Right. Situation? So then I would definitely focus on private, just like conversations with them, and really seeing what is causing it. Because at least for me, I know that whenever students act out, it's because either something happened at home, something happened in school, and you just don't know about it, and they're comfortable with you, so they're comfortable acting out with you because they know like you care about them, they know you love them. So really just talking like, oh, you know what? Like, I know this isn't the kind of person you are. I know you're such a good kid, and I see you making these choices, but this isn't you. Did something happen earlier today? Did something happen during school or maybe at the shelter? And then if you give them that opening, it could help build that conversation and that understanding. And then also, sometimes if they're not reacting well to you just being overly positive, then that's why it's really important to let them know when a consequence is coming. So just that they're ready for it. But always having that positive choice available. So I would do like that tracker. So you know what? If you do it, you can get a sticker, and you only need how many more stickers to get a reward or a break. Mm-hmm. And then another thing too is that when disruptions happen in a group setting, we could be really preventative about it. So if you always have kids that finish early, make sure they know what they could do after they're done with their work. That way they're not coming up to you saying, oh, I'm bored, I'm done, what do I do, what do I do? Make sure they already know at the beginning of the session what early finishers can do. And if you have a group that has like different academic levels, making sure that your activities actually represent their academic level. Because if you're giving a difficult activity to a low-level student, they'll already lose interest, they'll start acting up. Or if you give an activity that's too easy to a high-level student, the same thing will happen. They'll just finish really fast, and then they'll start acting up again. So you really want to minimize the amount of time that kids are just sitting in their chair doing nothing, because that's when problems start happening. That's when kids start making poor choices. And then also just wanting to reiterate that different strategies work for different students, because we did go over several strategies, but you're going to have to figure out which strategy works best for your student. Like with some of my kids, I have to really talk to them in a very stern voice so that they know the choice they made was not okay. But with other kids, I'm almost like sugary sweet. I'm like so gentle with them, because I know if I talk to them in a really stern voice, they'll just react negatively. So it just depends on what works with your kids. And then scenario 5, so they give up easily when work is difficult. I don't know if you have kids that look like that when they look at their work, but I have some kids that look like that. I'm like, oh, come on, you could do it. But first, if you have a student that's crying about homework, you have to give them time to calm down before you speak with them. Because sometimes I've tried having like side conversations with kids that were crying. They're not listening to a word I say. Like the moment the tears are out, they're not listening to anybody. So making sure you just give them that time to calm down before you start talking with them. And then strategies. So just going back to being really positive and not just being positive with them, but being positive about homework. So if you're talking to them about why homework is so important, you want to avoid saying something like, oh, if you don't do your homework, then all these bad things will happen to you. Like you're going to fail your test, you're not going to know anything. Because homework is already so negative for them that they already know all that negative stuff. They don't need to hear it again. But rather just focusing on the positive reasons why homework is really helpful. And something I do a lot too is I actually show inspirational videos or tell inspirational stories about athletes or celebrities that failed. Like for example, if they like basketball, I always talk about Michael Jordan and how he actually failed. How he was actually trying out for his high school team, but he didn't make it. And I tell them like, you know what? That high school tryout was really hard for him. And can you imagine what would happen if he just gave up right there rather than keep trying and trying? Like he would have never won like 6 NBA championships. You never would have won in college. And the same thing is true for their homework. Like if you give up right now, then all this learning, like you'd be missing out on it too. And just because something is difficult doesn't mean it's impossible. And then the last thing too is praising students when they show grit, even if it's only a short time. I've had students where they only did one question out of like 10, and I acted like they completed the whole worksheet. I was like, whoa, you did such a great job doing that one problem. And kids love that over-exaggeration, and hopefully that over-exaggeration motivates them to do like another problem. And if your kid's only able to finish one problem in your session because it was that hard, still praise them heavily rather than saying, oh, we got all this work that we did not do. Instead, praise the one problem that they did do. And then you could say, you know what, next time, let's try to do 2. Because you already could do one problem, so I know you could do 2 problems also. And then the last one, just explaining the benefit of doing work that's challenging. I always talk about people who exercise or people who lift weights. And I tell them if a weightlifter lifted a weight that was too light, their muscles aren't going to grow. It's just going to stay the same. And your brain is the same way too. Like if your brain is only doing work that is too easy, your brain's not going to grow. And I know you're so smart. I know I want you to keep growing. So that's why homework has to be challenging, because that's the only way your body grows. That's the only way your mind grows. And then scenario 6, always depends on the tutor for an answer. This is always a fun one. So when I think of a kid and what's in their mind when they see a word problem, it's literally this, like how I see math word problems from a kid's point of view. If you have 7 pencils or 4 pencils and 7 apples, how many pancakes will fit on the roof? Purple, because aliens don't wear hats. And literally when they see problems they don't know, that's what it sounds like to them. Like they're literally so confused and they feel so helpless, which is why they're going to you, because they feel like they've reached a point where I can't do it. Like I've really tried. I've really thought about it. I don't know. So when your student's feeling like that, then here's a strategy you could use with them. So you have to teach them how to think critically. And when I say critically, you have to help them create questions that they can ask themselves to progress through the problems. So when I have a kid that doesn't know a math problem, I give them questions that they could ask themselves. So I'll tell the kid, okay, remember, you have to tell yourself what keywords are important. Then the kid goes like, oh, I have to remember, I have to ask myself what keywords are important. Oh, I'll underline these words. And then they say, oh, I don't know. I was like, okay, so if you don't know, this is the next question you ask yourself. You have to ask yourself what numbers are important and how do you know? And then the kid goes like, oh, that's what I do next. So I had to ask myself what numbers are important and how do I know? And then eventually the kid learns how to ask themselves like, what operation would make the most sense to solve it and why? And we don't want to just teach kids how to solve problems step by step, because if you're teaching kids how to solve problems step by step, there's always going to be a problem that won't follow that step-by-step process. So instead of that, you want to teach your student questions that they could ask themselves. So I know it's like a little bit, it's kind of like you're trying to teach them how to think. You're trying to teach them how to think and problem solve so that they don't need you to think for them. And it takes a while to develop this because some kids will be like, oh, I asked myself and I still don't know. And that's when you can help them through that process. But just start teaching your kids how to ask themselves those kinds of questions and just help them build a plan. Because if your kid doesn't have a plan for solving problems, then they'll always have to ask you, what's the plan or how do I think?
And in that case too, I just wanted to mention that sometimes, a student that we're working with at School on Wheels, they might, not know the questions to ask because they have missed so much of the math that's required for that particular problem, right? So, in that case, we might even just have to just forget about the homework or the problem that they're working on and go back, a few steps to figure out what it is that the student has missed. Because I think sometimes, our students are really behind and they may have missed a critical operation. Maybe they missed a whole bunch of stuff on division and, the problem requires division. So that's a really good time when you could do an assessment with the student or, just maybe work on something that's a few step back, more basic division before doing long division, that kind of thing.
Right, exactly. And that's why thinking about the process is so important. So when your kid is solving a question, it's not about just finding the answer. It's literally like, what questions did I have to ask myself to get the answer? Because sometimes, like, my kids will be like, oh, I just want to know the answer. And I'll even give them the answer. It's like, you know what? This is the answer. But how did I get that? And then they think like, oh, wow, the answer really doesn't matter. It's more about like, what am I doing so that I could solve these kinds of problems? And then scenario 7, only wants to work on their favorite or easiest subject. So we have another one. This homework looks hard. Do you want me to eat it? And kids will be so good at subjects that they're strong at, but then when they see a subject that they know is a weakness for them, then they kind of have this mindset like, oh, can I just get rid of it or can I just avoid it? And strategies to deal with that are first, start with the most difficult assignment, because if they already have a strength, they could probably do that homework on their own. And that's how you could explain it to them. And you could say, like, you know what, I'm here to help you with things that you need, that you're not sure what to do. Because if you could already do that, then you could definitely do that on your own. So let's just work on this hardest assignment and let's try to get that done. And then just going back to using strategic breaks. So something that helps kids with their grit is knowing that a reward is coming. So if they have to work on a really difficult math problem, then you could say like, oh, let's work on it for 10 minutes, then we'll have a break for 2 minutes. And then in the kid's mind, it helps them think like, okay, yeah, I do have to work hard on this problem for 10 minutes, but at least a break is coming. So that way it's more of an incentive to get that hard work done. And then just going back to the previous strategy too, like helping students learn how to think critically on their own. And just like what Amanda said, it's probably hard for them because they're just missing those gaps or missing those skills. So then doing that hard assignment will really help them, will really help you see what they need to work on. And then another thing too is that if you have access to Wi-Fi or to the internet, you could use online resources too. So if you see a kid doesn't understand what they're learning in their homework, then you could watch a quick video on Khan Academy or YouTube, and that could have someone else explain the strategy to them. And then last but not least is just reminding students about the value of homework, because for a lot of our kids, failure seems like a bad thing, that if you failed, then you're like a loser or you don't know anything. But you always want to remind them that failure is actually just a way of learning, and it's just a way of growing your mind, and that failure is not bad. And if you had to fail on something, or you have to try something multiple times, it's okay, because that's just how learning is. You're not going to get something right the first time. And I always tell my kids, like, even me, I'm still learning, and I have to keep doing things over and over again to get better at it. And that's the same way kids should think about their homework too. And those are the scenarios I had. So if you have any other questions.
Yeah, are there any scenarios that Natalie didn't cover that people want to discuss? Any in particular, it could be something that happened in a tutoring session you didn't know how to respond, or just something that you notice in your student. Any questions about that kind of thing? You can go ahead and type them in. What about working with high school students when they're really, I know that, we work with a lot of students who have had such bad experiences with, homework, you focus a lot on, talking about the benefit, but they might not care, right? They might say, I don't care if I don't do this and I fail, right? And I don't care about the benefit of homework, right? What would you do in a situation with that, where you really had somebody that was so disillusioned with just the whole process?
So that's why knowing your students' interests is really important, because if you know, like, they really love like a basketball player or a rapper or just anybody, then you could tell them, like, well, you know what? This basketball player really failed before, but they didn't give up. And it's the same way too. Like, if you give up, then imagine how much you could lose. And I always tell my kids too, like I see like all this potential in you. I see the amazing person you are. And I'm going to help you see that in yourself too. Like, right now, you don't think you have that, but I know you do. And that's why we're doing this, so that you could get there. And really just focusing on just that belief in them. And it is a struggle, because like with some of my kids too, like, they tell me like I can't do it or I'm worthless and all that. But over time, like, if you have the chance to spend like a few weeks with them, or like a month or so, when you start telling them like, I believe you because I see you being greater than what you see yourself as, then they slowly start believing that in themselves too.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So how concerned should we be with students' grades versus understanding the material at their own pace?
Right. So what do they mean? Like, they can actually see their students' grades?
Yeah, I mean, if how focused should they be on like getting a good grade versus really understanding the material?
I think the priority is always understanding the material, because if they're learning these new concepts but they don't have an understanding of the foundational skills, then all those new concepts they learn will eventually be out of their reach. So even right now, like, if you choose to spend time on foundational skills and it affects their grade because they need to learn new content, I would just say that, yeah, like the foundational skills, you just need to emphasize them, because without them, they won't be able to do anything beyond that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a story from one of our tutors who wants to share that when they had a success with their tutoring session, when a child didn't want to do their work, I asked who his favorite celebrity was. He said a racer. I asked if he was into car racing. He said he was. He was a big fan of NASCAR. I then told him that the best racers had to practice a lot to get good. They have to understand suspension and vehicle maintenance, which require these in math. So they learn all the things we're working on here and learn them to become great racers. So she also reiterated that none of them got where they are without practice. So that's great. Yeah, that's a wonderful example of using the student's interests to kind of get your student motivated to do their own work. So a student, let's see, I have a question regarding consequences for bad behavior.
Right.
I give my student 2 warnings and then let them know a consequence is coming. What is a fair consequence? Is saying you have to talk to their parent or guardian fair? I would probably say, I'll just
go ahead.
poke my nose in.
Yeah.
I would say that, we want to really avoid, having a talk with a parent or guardian as kind of a last resort.
Right.
If nothing else is working, I would say probably a consequence, we were going to spend 10 minutes at the end playing a game. I don't think we'll do that this time because you weren't, you really aren't focusing and behaving, on the project that we're doing, or, so I would probably say, that would maybe be a fair consequence. And then, if the student is really, just never behaving and is really just acting out in every session, that's definitely something you need to talk to the parent about. And kind of work out like what's going on with the student. And you did mention usually acting out a negative behavior is because something else is going on in the student's life, whether it's a family issue or some issue at school, that they're having the struggle of just being homeless. They're having a lot of bad experiences and maybe trusting you to kind of be the one that is going to accept, that they just kind of have to get this out of their system. So, ignoring, redirecting that negative behavior to something positive, really focusing on the positive, those are the things that we want to do first before resorting to negative consequences.
Right, exactly. And just like how Amanda put it, you always want to make sure there's something positive at the end because that gives you flexibility to say that, if we're not doing our work, we have to spend all this time doing our work and we're losing time from our game, right? So it's just a matter of explaining it to them as just exchanging time. Like, I would love to play this game with you and I want to, but we can't because we're still doing our work and we need this time to do work because your work is so important.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions coming in? Anybody else have any thoughts? Looks like, let's see. Nope. Okay, great. So it looks like we're wrapping up. Natalie is going to share her email address. So if you have any questions that come up after the presentation's over, feel free to reach out to her directly, or you can reach out to either me or Natasha Baez here at School on Wheels. We want to thank you all for attending today. Thank you, Natalie, for giving such a great presentation. I know it's been really helpful for me. So great. We will see you next time, everyone.